Dust swirled around the boots of a man who knew the West better than most. This was Marshal Silas Creed, a name whispered with respect in saloons and feared in outlaw camps. He wasn't a flashy gunslinger, nor a man prone to boasting. Silas was quiet steel, a man who upheld the law because he believed in it, even when it felt like a losing battle against the harsh realities of the frontier. Silas had seen enough sunrises paint the desert sky crimson to last a lifetime. He'd tracked enough criminals to know the desperation that drove some men to darkness. He delivered justice fairly, but lately, a weariness had settled in his bones. The line between right and wrong seemed to blur more each day. He sat on his horse, Justice, a sturdy Appaloosa, gazing out at the vast expanse. The land was beautiful, unforgiving, and lonely. Silas felt a kinship with it. He was a part of this hard country, just like the tumbleweeds and the jagged mountains. Soon, that peace would be shattered. A new task was coming, one that would test his beliefs and challenge everything he thought he knew about justice. A woman named Lena Dustfire Moreno was about to ride into his life. And riding into his life, she would. Lena Dustfire Moreno was a phantom, a whisper in the wind. Some said she was a cold-blooded killer. Others claimed she was a protector of the innocent, robbing from the rich to feed the poor. The truth, as it often did, lay somewhere in between, buried beneath layers of circumstance and survival. Lena wasn't born an outlaw. She was a girl with dreams, living on a small ranch with her family. But the West was a cruel place, and tragedy struck, leaving Lena alone and vulnerable. It hardened her, forging a spirit of defiance and a determination to survive. She earned her nickname Dustfire, not just for the speed of her horse and the dust cloud she kicked up during a chase, but for the fire in her eyes, a burning ember of anger and a thirst for justice that fueled her every action. She moved like a shadow, appearing and disappearing at will, always one step ahead of the law. Few had seen her face and lived to tell the tale, adding to her mystique and making her a legend in her own time. She was a ghost, a force of nature, and soon she would become Silas Creed's obsession. The summons came in the form of a telegram, crackling with urgency. Silas read the curt message twice, the words sinking in like a branding iron. Lena Dustfire Moreno. Apprehend. Immediately. Bring her to justice. Governor's orders. Justice. That word again. It felt heavier than usual this time. He crumpled the telegram in his fist, the paper a flimsy shield against the weight of the task ahead. The governor rarely got involved in such matters, which meant Lena Dustfire had stirred up a hornet's nest. Whatever she'd done, it had reached the highest levels of power. Silas sighed, the sound lost in the vastness of the plains. He knew this wouldn't be easy. Tracking Lena would be like chasing a ghost through a sandstorm. She knew the land, the hidden trails, the forgotten watering holes. But Silas Creed was a patient man. He was a tracker, a hunter, and he wouldn't rest until he brought Lena Dustfire to justice, whether he liked it or not. He just didn't know yet how much that word justice was about to change its meaning. He prepared justice for the long ride ahead. The trail was faint, barely a whisper in the dust, but Silas Creed saw it. A broken twig, a misplaced stone, the subtle shift in the wind. Lena Dustfire hadn't been careful enough. Or perhaps she had been careful, just not careful enough for Silas. He followed the signs, each one telling a story. She rode hard, favoring rocky ground where possible. She stopped at a dry creek bed, allowing her horse a moment's rest in the meager shade. She was heading west, towards the jagged peaks of the Devil's Tooth Mountains, a lawless territory where even seasoned outlaws feared to tread. The landscape changed as he rode, the open plains giving way to canyons and dense forests. The air grew cooler, the shadows longer. He knew he was getting closer. He could feel it, a prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He imagined Lena, just ahead, a flicker of movement in the trees, a glint of sunlight on her rifle. He urged justice onward, the horse's hooves drumming a steady rhythm against the rocky terrain. The chase was on. It was a game of cat and mouse, a dance between hunter and hunted, and Silas Creed intended to win. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this particular hunt was different, that he was hunting something more than just an outlaw. He found her at the edge of a clearing, a small cabin nestled amongst the trees. Smoke curled from the chimney, a clear sign of habitation. Silas dismounted, his senses on high alert. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. He kicked the door open, the suddenness of the action echoing in the still air. Lena was inside, her back to him, tending a small fire. She whirled around, a rifle instantly in her hands, her eyes blazing with defiance. "Creed," she said, her voice low and steady. "I expected you sooner." "Dustfire," Silas replied, his own voice calm. "It's over, Lena. Come quietly." "It's never over," she retorted, her grip tightening on the rifle. "Not for me." A tense standoff ensued. They circled each other, each waiting for the other to make a move. The air crackled with unspoken words, with the weight of their shared history, even though they barely knew each other. Lena was fast, skilled, but Silas was relentless. Suddenly, Lena lunged for the back door, firing a shot as she went. Silas returned fire, narrowly missing her. She disappeared into the woods, swallowed by the trees. He'd almost had her. Almost. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was good. Very good. This was going to be more challenging than he thought. And perhaps more interesting. Silas didn't immediately pursue her. He stood for a moment, listening to the rustling leaves, the distant call of a hawk. He knew these woods, but Lena knew them better. Charging blindly after her would be foolish. Instead, he turned his attention to the cabin, searching for clues, anything that would tell him more about the woman he was hunting. He found a few personal belongings, a worn leather-bound journal, a small wooden carving of a horse, a faded photograph of the family. The journal was locked, but the photograph was revealing. A young Lena, smiling brightly, standing between a man and a woman, all three radiating happiness. It was a stark contrast to the hardened outlaw he had just faced. He carefully tucked the photograph into his pocket. Something about that image stirred a feeling within him, a sense of empathy he hadn't expected. He needed to know more. Back in town, he visited the local newspaper office, a dusty, cluttered space filled with old records. He asked the grizzled editor about Lena Moreno. The editor, initially hesitant, eventually revealed snippets of information. The tragic death of her family, a land dispute, whispers of corruption and injustice. The story that began to unfold was far more complicated than the simple outlaw label the governor had assigned her. Silas began to wonder if he was on the right side of this hunt. Days turned into weeks as Silas continued his pursuit, but his focus had shifted. He was no longer just tracking an outlaw. He was piecing together a puzzle, trying to understand the events that had shaped Lena Dustfire. He learned of corrupt land barons, double crossings, and a legal system that favored the wealthy and powerful. One evening, caught in a sudden downpour, Silas sought shelter in an abandoned mine. As he built a fire, he heard a noise. He drew his revolver, his heart pounding. "Don't shoot, Creed," a voice called out from the shadows. It was Lena. She stepped into the firelight, her face streaked with rain, her clothes soaked. She looked tired, vulnerable. "What do you want?" Silas asked, his gun still raised. "Shelter," she replied, her eyes meeting his. "And maybe a truce, just for tonight." Silas hesitated. He knew he should arrest her, but something held him back. The rain was relentless, the night was cold, and he couldn't deny the humanity in her eyes. "All right," he said, lowering his gun. "Truce, for tonight." They shared the meager warmth of the fire, a silent understanding passing between them. The storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within Silas. He was no longer sure who the real outlaws were. The truce held through the night, the storm acting as a somber backdrop to their uneasy companionship. As dawn broke, a new threat emerged. A band of ruthless claim jumpers, notorious for their brutality, descended upon the mine, seeking to exploit a rumored vein of silver. Silas and Lena were trapped. The claim jumpers, led by a man named Razor Ricard, were heavily armed and had no qualms about killing anyone who stood in their way. "Looks like we have company," Lena said, her voice grim. "And they don't look friendly." "We either fight or surrender," Silas replied, his hand instinctively reaching for his gun. "Surrender isn't an option," Lena stated, her eyes hardening. They worked together, barricading the entrance to the mine, using whatever they could find. Silas, with his lawman experience, and Lena, with her knowledge of survival, formed an unlikely alliance. They set traps, planned their defense, and prepared for the inevitable showdown. The attack came swiftly and violently. The claim jumpers stormed the mine, firing their weapons. Silas and Lena returned fire, fighting side by side, their skills complementing each other. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were determined to survive. The bond forged in the storm was now tested in the crucible of battle. They had to trust each other, or they would both die. The battle raged for hours, a chaotic symphony of gunfire and desperation. Between volleys, Silas and Lena found brief moments to catch their breath, sharing stories to keep their spirits up. Lena spoke of her family, her voice softening as she recalled happier times. Silas shared his own regrets, the cases he wished he could have handled differently, the lives he couldn't save. They discovered a shared sense of loss, a common understanding of the harsh realities of the West. Lena saw past Silas's badge, recognizing the weariness in his eyes, the burden he carried. Silas saw past Lena's outlaw persona, glimpsing the hurt and the resilience that lay beneath. As the sun began to set, their ammunition dwindled. They were wounded, exhausted, but they refused to give up. "We can't hold them off much longer," Silas said, his voice strained. "We have to try," Lena replied, her eyes filled with determination. "There's a back entrance to the mine. We can use it to escape." "And then what?" Silas asked. Lena hesitated. "I don't know," she admitted, "but we'll figure out. Together." Her words hung in the air, a promise, a challenge. Silas looked into her eyes and saw not an outlaw, but a survivor, a woman fighting for her life. And he knew, in that moment, that he would do anything to protect her. The line between duty and desire was blurring, threatening to disappear altogether. They slipped through the back entrance, leaving the claim jumpers to believe they were still inside. The escape was fraught with danger, navigating treacherous tunnels and hidden pitfalls. As they emerged into the darkness, they knew they were far from safe. "We need to split up," Lena said, her voice urgent. "They'll be looking for us." Silas hesitated. He didn't want to leave her. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere they won't find me," she replied, her eyes searching his. "Somewhere I can be free." Silas knew he should arrest her, right then and there. It was his duty, his responsibility. But he couldn't. He couldn't bring himself to betray the trust that had formed between them, the connection that had grown stronger with each passing moment. He thought of his badge, his career, his reputation. He thought of the governor's orders, the expectations of the law. But those things seemed distant, insignificant compared to the woman standing before him. His conscience was a battlefield, torn between the rigid principles he had always lived by and the undeniable feelings he now harbored for Lena. He had always seen the world in black and white, right and wrong. But Lena had shown him the shades of gray, the complexities of justice, the humanity that existed even in the most hardened outlaws. The decision he was about to make would change everything. "Go north," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. "There's a hidden passage through the mountains. It'll take you to safer territory." He knew he was crossing a line, aiding and abetting a fugitive, but he couldn't turn back. As Lena disappeared into the shadows, Silas turned and headed back towards town, knowing he had to maintain the illusion of pursuing her. He rejoined his posse, who had arrived in response to the gunfight at the mine. "Did you get her, Marshal?" Deputy Johnson asked, his eyes filled with suspicion. "She got away," Silas replied, his voice flat. "But I'm on her trail." He directed the posse in the opposite direction of the hidden passage, claiming Lena had headed south. He made it seem convincing, but he could feel the doubt in the air, the unspoken questions in his men's eyes. They had known him for years, trusted him implicitly. Now, They were starting to wonder. As they rode, Silas caught Deputy Johnson staring at him. "Something on your mind, Johnson?" he asked. "Just wondering, Marshal," Johnson said, his voice carefully neutral. "You seem different, like you're not really trying to catch her." Silas met his gaze, his expression unreadable. "I'm doing my job, Johnson, just like always." But he knew, deep down, that things would never be the same. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. He had betrayed his duty, his oath, for a woman he barely knew, and he was willing to face the consequences. Haunted by Johnson's suspicion and the weight of his decision, Silas found himself unable to sleep. He rode back to the hidden passage, a desperate hope flickering within him. He needed to see Lena again, to understand if he had done the right thing. He found her camped near a stream, the firelight dancing on her face. She looked surprised to see him, but not unwelcome. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice soft. "I needed to know," Silas replied, his gaze intense. "I needed to understand why you did what you did." Lena hesitated, then sighed. She knew she owed him the truth. She recounted the story of her family's land, stolen by a wealthy railroad baron with the help of corrupt officials. Her parents had fought back, but they were no match for his power. They were murdered, their deaths covered up, leaving Lena alone and with nothing. The law had failed her, so she had taken justice into her own hands, targeting those who had wronged her and others like her. "I didn't want to become an outlaw," she said, her voice filled with pain. "But I had no choice. It was the only way to survive, the only way to fight back." Silas listened, his heart aching for her. He finally understood the fire in her eyes, the burning ember of anger that fueled her actions. He knew then that he couldn't bring her in. He wouldn't. "I believe you, Lena," Silas said, his voice firm. "I believe in your inherent goodness. And I believe in the injustice you've suffered." Lena looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and disbelief. "What does that mean, Creed?" "It means I can't bring you in," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "I won't." A wave of relief washed over Lena, but it was quickly followed by concern. "What about your job? Your reputation?" "Those things don't matter anymore," Silas said, his hand gently cupping her face. "What matters is you. What matters is doing what's right." He knew his decision would have consequences. He would be branded a traitor, an outlaw himself. But he was prepared to face whatever came his way, as long as Lena was safe. "What will you do?" Lena asked. "I'm not sure," Silas admitted, "but I'll figure something out. Maybe I'll even join you." Lena smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that lit up her face. "I like that, Creed. I'd like that very much." But their moment of peace was short-lived. They heard the sound of approaching horses, the unmistakable rumble of a posse. The law was closing in. "They're coming," Lena said, her voice urgent. "We have to go. Now." Silas nodded. He knew they had to make a choice, a final decision that would determine their fate. They were both outlaws now, bound together by circumstance and by something far more powerful, love. They mounted their horses, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Silas knew he couldn't outrun the law forever, but he could buy Lena some time. He had a plan, a risky one, but it was their only chance. "We'll split up," Silas said, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "You head west, towards the border. I'll draw them away from you." "No, Lena pretestiv. I won't leave you." "You have to," Silas insisted. "Your freedom is more important than anything else." He pulled her close, his lips meeting hers in a desperate kiss, a promise of a future they might never have. "I'll find you, Lena. I promise. Just stay safe." With a heavy heart, Lena agreed. They rode in opposite directions, the sound of the posse growing closer. Silas knew he had to make a stand, to face the consequences of his actions. He found a narrow canyon, a perfect place for an ambush. He dismounted, taking cover behind a rocky outcrop, his rifle ready. He was no longer Marshal Silas Creed, the respected lawman. He was just Silas, a man fighting for the woman he loved, willing to risk everything for her freedom. The final showdown was about to begin. He knew that either he and Lena would be free, or they both would die. He just had to make sure that whatever happened, Lena had the best chance to live a free life. He took a deep breath. He was ready. The posse thundered into the canyon, their faces grim, their guns drawn. Silas opened fire, the canyon echoing with the sound of gunfire. He fought bravely, skillfully, taking down several men before they even had a chance to react. But he was outnumbered, outgunned. Just when he thought it was over, a familiar figure appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the setting sun. It was Razor Ricard, the claim jumper, and he had Lena in his sights. Silas knew he had to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing himself. He charged out into the open, drawing Ricard's fire. Lena, seeing Silas in danger, couldn't stand by. She spurred her horse into action, racing towards the canyon. The scene erupted into chaos. The posse fired at Silas, Ricard fired at Lena, and Lena fired at Ricard. Silas and Lena fought back to back, a whirlwind of bullets and fury. They were a formidable team, their love and determination fueling their every move. Despite the odds, they managed to turn the tide. Ricard fell, his reign of terror finally over. The posse, demoralized by the loss of their leader and impressed by Silas's courage, began to waver. They realized that they were fighting for the wrong side, that Silas was a good man who had simply made a difficult choice. The intense gunfight, fueled by love and desperation, changed everything. It was the final test, and they had passed it together. But their journey was far from over. The posse, now realizing the truth, allowed Lena to escape. Silas watched as she rode towards the border, a bittersweet ache in his heart. He knew he couldn't go with her, not yet. He had to face the music, to clear his name, to expose the corruption that had driven Lena to a life of outlawry. He turned to his men, his gaze steady. "I'm going back to town," he said. "I'm going to tell the truth about what happened here, and I'm going to bring those responsible to justice." Deputy Johnson stepped forward, his expression filled with respect. "We're with you, Marshal," he said. "We always have been." Silas knew it wouldn't be easy. He would face opposition, threats, and possibly even imprisonment. But he was no longer afraid. He had found something worth fighting for, something worth sacrificing everything for. He watched as Lena reached the border, disappearing into the vastness of the unknown. He knew he might never see her again, but he held onto the promise they had made, the hope that someday, somehow, they would be together again. He turned his horse towards town, his heart filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. He had a long road ahead of him, but he was ready to face it. He had to make the West a better place, a place where justice prevailed, a place where Lena could finally be free. Their goodbye was filled with love, hope, and a promise of reunion. The wheels of justice turned slowly but surely. Silas, with the unwavering support of Deputy Johnson and a few other honest townsfolk, managed to expose the corruption that had plagued the region for so long. The railroad baron and several corrupt officials were brought to justice, their power stripped away. Silas had resigned from his position as marshal, his reputation forever tarnished in the eyes of some. But he didn't care. He had done what was right, and that was all that mattered. One day, a letter arrived, postmarked from a distant town. It was from Lena. She was safe, thriving, and living a new life. She wrote of her newfound freedom, her gratitude to Silas, and her unwavering love for him. Silas smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. He knew he couldn't stay in this town any longer. He had to find her, to start a new life with her, a life where justice and love prevailed. He packed his belongings, said goodbye to his friends, and mounted justice. He rode west, towards the setting sun, towards a future filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. He was no longer Marshal Silas Creed, the lawman. He was just Silas, a man in search of his heart's desire. The West was still a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a place of second chances, a place where anything was possible. And Silas knew, with unwavering certainty, that he would find Lena again. Their story was far from over. It was just beginning. The end.